So welcome to DePaul 2023 China Town Hall event. If this is your first time to join DePaul, let me give you a little bit of background information about this DePaul China Town Hall. DePaul, we have been organizing this event since, I think, one of our earliest organizer of this event, Professor Philip Stolley is here. I think we started in 2007 when you were here, when you came to join DePaul. So
something like that, yeah.
So we've been doing this for more than 10 years. All right. As a the co-organizer of this event in the past more than 10 years, DePaul Chinese Studies Program is we offer a major in Chinese Studies, a BA degree in Chinese Studies. We offer courses 4 years of Chinese and Mandarin Chinese language courses from beginner level to advanced level. And we also require students to take a number of Chinese Studies courses taught in English from different disciplines. For example, we have Chinese art, Chinese history, and Chinese politics. We do have quite a few faculty members joining us tonight to help our students have a more comprehensive understanding about China as a society and as also a civilization. So we have one major and also 3 minors. The major is a major in Chinese Studies, and minor in Chinese Studies, minor in Chinese language, and minor in commercial Chinese Studies. And if this is your first time to join the DePaul China Town Hall event, we hope you join us to attend other events organized by our program in the future. You can know more about our faculty and students. All right. Next, I want to mention about the structure of the China Town Hall. And tonight we have our guest speaker, Mr. John Holden here. We will he will first give a 20 minutes, like some background information about his own view, any story he would like to share, and some kind of also views on the current issues. And then we're going to open the floor to our audience. And so if anybody actually during the monologue time, if you want to just post your questions in the chat box, feel free to do so. But if you want to wait till our Q&A session, you can raise your hand, ask questions in person, use your own voice to ask questions. Okay, you are allowed. You can turn on video or not. We're not required to do this, but it will feel better to feel more like in a town hall, in a conversation if you turn on your camera, especially if you are asking questions. Okay. All right. Next, I would like to introduce our guest speaker tonight at DePaul's China Town Hall section. So we're very honored to have Mr. John Holden to join us tonight as our local speaker. And Mr. Holden's China career spans more than 4 decades and 28 years, of which he spent on the ground in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taipei. And prior to joining McLarty in 2019, Holden served as president and CEO of the U.S. China Strong Foundation after a decade in Beijing as managing director and senior counselor for Hill and Norton Strategies. He was a founding chairman of Sheckley China Limited and associate dean at the Peking University's Yanqing Academy and professor of practice at its Guanghua School of Management. While at Peking University, Holden received a national award for service to education, as well as the country's Friendship Award. And from 1998 to 2005, Holden was president of the National Committee on US-China Relations, where he created legacy programs such as the Public Intellectuals Program, the shortened for PIP, the U.S. China Young Leaders Forum, and the U.S. China Foreign Policy Colloquium. For the 12 prior years, he was employed by Cargill. Well, he played key roles in the establishment of the company's first 10 businesses in China and served as a chairman of his China holding company. And Holden has been active in American chambers of commerce in both Hong Kong and Beijing, and served as chairman of the board of governors of the latter organization in 1997. And he is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the National Committee on US-China Relations, and the senior associate non-resident of the trustee chair in Chinese business and economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Last but not least, his Chinese name is He Liqiang, And Holden has a solid foundation in literary and Mandarin Chinese, which he studied at the University of Minnesota, where he received BA and in Chinese Studies. And also Stanford University, where he received an MA and all PhD coursework and completed all his PhD coursework over there. So I know Mr. Holden has a very long resume, which he does not, we're not doing a justice for him here by giving this short description. So now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Holden to share his stories and insights.
Well, thank you, Lee. I apologize for the long resume. That's what happens when you get old. It starts to expand a little bit, but I'm particularly pleased to see Professor Stiley here. We haven't met, I don't believe, but I know that you're a member of the Public Intellectuals Program, and something that Jan Barris has managed magnificently since I left. I just got it going, kicked off in 2005, but it's a great program, and I'm glad that you're part of it. Look forward to your comments and questions. Lee, by the way, has done a great job in setting things up here for us today. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'll offer some initial comments. They may seem a little random, but it's hard to capture a relationship as complicated and consequential as the U.S.-China relations. It's like this massive elephant. We're blind people. We can feel little parts of it. We don't have time to address everything. So I thought I'd talk about a few things that just popped up and have popped up into my head recently. But first, a quick note about Ambassador Burns. I had the privilege of meeting him and spending some time with him in Beijing in March. I was excited to learn that he was going to be the ambassador, even though some people said, "Oh my gosh, well, he doesn't know anything about China." Well, that's not true. He's a veteran diplomat, knows a lot about the world, and as you will have observed from his comments, he's fully engaged. He is a consummate professional, very creative, and is a terrific student. Meanwhile, of course, the embassy has many China experts that he can draw on. I was tickled to know that he's learning Chinese, so that's great. His closing remark, where he talked about this relationship as enormously complex. I mean, that's at the end of the day. That's about if you look for a one sentence description of it. That's what it has to be, in my view. And he was right to quote President Biden as saying that the two countries have a responsibility to keep the peace. This is the bottom line in this relationship today. It didn't used to be, but today it's important that despite the frictions and the competition and the difficulties we have in communicating and balancing our interests, we have to be sure that they don't get out of kilter so much so that we end up in a war with one another. I also want to just offer a little note about the National Committee. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a fascinating organization. I had the privilege of being its president from 1998 to 2005. And it was established in 1966. Some of you will know that in the 1960s, quite a number of American political leaders were beginning to entertain the idea that the U.S. and China might one day need to establish a relationship. Those people included J. William Fulbright, John F. Kennedy, and most famously, Richard Nixon. And that's when the committee was founded in '66. In the early days, its function was mainly to bring to American audiences folks who had been in China, who could talk about what it was like firsthand. And I'm pleased that since I left the committee, Steve Orleans has launched these Chinatown halls to reopen an educational function and to re-engage with the American people about China, because there just isn't enough awareness of what's involved, the stakes that are involved in this. So I'm really delighted if you have a chance, go on NCUSCR.org, take a look at the things that they're doing, and maybe get involved if you can. So I began studying Chinese in 1971. Seems like that's a very long time ago. And it happens to be the year that Henry Kissinger made his first secret visit to China. And I can't claim any great vision. I had no idea that at one point I would have a chance to travel to China, or that we would have an extraordinarily rich relationship with that country. I did it because I was intellectually adventuresome. I wanted to learn about Chinese civilization. I was interested in literature, Chinese philosophy, landscape painting, and so on. And the language opened the door to all of that for me, for which I'm forever grateful. But the thread that runs through my career has always been the Chinese people, because it's the encounters, it's the friendships, it's the laughter, it's the hard work together. That's what has always driven me to go back to work on China matters, even when things are difficult. It's this the Chinese people. It's a rich country. They're not all the same. North, south, east, and west. There are many different kinds of Chinese people. Some I like, many I love. Others I'm not so sure about. But it's a Chinese people and Americans often get along very, very well with one another, and I'm hopeful that opportunities for us to engage with one another will continue to be there. And so I do encourage you, as did Ambassador Burns, to travel to China, make friends. You have Chinese students on your campus. Get to know them, make them feel at home, as and you would be made to feel at home in China. Yesterday there was a program at the Council on Foreign Relations about it's the beginning of a study group about China-Russia relations. And the historian Joseph Terigian was talking about the fights that occurred, the debates or arguments, I should say, between Khrushchev and Chairman Mao in the 1950s. And I was reminded of an encounter I had with an extraordinary Chinese individual back in 1980 in Washington, D.C. I had a brief job as an interpreter for after I left grad school, an interpreter for the Encyclopedia Britannica. They had an event announcing that the Encyclopedia Britannica would be translated into Chinese. This was in the summer of 1980. They had the Chinese Encyclopedia Publishing House had some very interesting people. Liu Junxi, who eventually became the founding editor of the China Daily, a very interesting veteran journalist, and Yan Mingfu. Yan was the interpreter Russian interpreter for Chairman Mao. And he was a very gregarious fellow, very, very bright and witty and fun. And we had one of these banquets, and at the end of it, he turned to me and said, I was a young guy at the time. He said, "You doing anything tonight?" And I said, "No." So he said, "Well, there's a mini bar in my room. Why don't we go up and start drinking whiskey?" So I said, "Fine with me." I went up to his room. We sat there, and he told me a little bit about his life. He had been in prison for, I think it was 7 years. I asked him, and he was in solitary confinement. I asked him, "How did you stay sane?" Well, he said, "One of the things I did was I loved Pushkin, and I would walk around my cell reciting Pushkin in Russian." But the more interesting thing that's relevant to China-Russia relations was a story that he told me about Khrushchev and Mao. This was 1958. they were at a body of water. It's not clear to me whether it was a pond or a lake or a river. And Chairman Mao loved to swim, and so he was paddling back and forth in the water. Khrushchev was sitting on the shore, wearing a white linen suit, as you did in those days, and they were going back and forth, arguing about something. And at one point, Khrushchev got very, very angry and stood up and wanted to make his point. He just wandered right into the water to make his point next to Chairman Mao. And so Yan Mingfu had no choice but to also walk into the water as the two Chinese and Russian leaders had their argument. And as he told me about walking into the water, he laughed and laughed and laughed. It was just it was quite extraordinary. But I stayed in touch with him when I eventually moved to China later that year, and got to know his people. And as a favor, or as thanks to me for tutoring some of his staff, he suggested that they take me to the Great Hall of the People. This was in February 1981. And so we walked up the steps. This was in the days when you could walk from the Peking Hotel to the Great Hall of the People with no interference, and there were very few cars. So we walked up, and the guards looked at me as a foreigner, and they said, "What?" And they halted me and said, "No, he can't go in." And the two young people were totally embarrassed, and they said, "Well, wait a second, can you make a phone call?" So they went over, they found a phone. The guard, the official, dialed a couple of numbers. They reached Yan Mingfu, who ordered them to let me in, the Great Hall of People. So there I was on New Year's Eve with 10,000 Chinese officials and militia, watching the future of China from the perspective of the intelligentsia and the leadership of China. Anyway, Yan eventually was sent to Tiananmen Square to negotiate with the students, something that ended not well. As you know, he was unable to resolve the situation, and was his role was undercut by another delegate from the leadership. He eventually was removed from power again, and then I saw him at the Great Hall of the People at a banquet. I walked up to him. This was several years later, the early 90s. And I said, "Mingfu, it's great to see you. How are you?" And he looked at me with a big smile on his face. He says, "The fact that you're seeing me here means I'm doing very, very well." Anyway, this is a bit of a long story about Yan Mingfu, but he's an extraordinarily interesting man who died this past summer, and is one of the many Chinese people I've known who had tremendous wit and humanity and commitments to do the right things. Another individual that I'd like to mention is a man named Cao De Wang. Cao De Wang is a man from Fujian. He's now in his 70s. He founded a company called Fuyao Glass. Fuyao makes automotive glass. And you can, if you're interested, you can watch a movie about his factory in Ohio. The movie, it's a documentary called American Factory. A couple of years ago, it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. It's an amazing film, and Cao De Wang figures prominently in that. He allowed the filmmakers to go into the plant, talk to anybody without any interference, and to use whatever film that they wanted to, even though it could be embarrassing to him. The result is extraordinary, and I'll be seeing him in a couple of weeks in New York. Looking forward to seeing him again. But here's a man of enormous energy, creativity, vision, and leadership, who has succeeded transplanting his business culture and adapting it to the United States. But he's also a marvelous man who's interested in education, has founded a university in China. We move ahead quickly to a couple of things. So people, that's a couple of examples of people I've known. I've also known farmers, I've known factory workers, and lots of other people, and I miss them tremendously. That's why it was so difficult during COVID not to be able to travel back to China. People talk about a Cold War with China, and I just like to go on record as saying that I think that is an absolutely inappropriate term for the relationship that we have with China. It's one that, those of us who remember the Cold War, it was massively different. We had no economic relationship to speak of with the Soviet Union or with its satellites, and it was, and there was very little communication back and forth. We now have a very complicated and intertwined relationship with China that has elements of cooperation, competition, and business collaboration. It's much more complicated than that. So it's and to use the term war again is very misleading. So I whenever you hear people talking about, one person I respect a lot uses the term reluctantly because he can't think of a better one, and I'd like to challenge all of you to come up with a better one. Maybe Nick Burns' idea that just call it a very complicated relationship is enough for now. So people look at China now and they think they can extract clues to China's future intentions. I think that is a very difficult thing to do. It's not enough just to read the speeches of Chinese leaders or look at 5-year plans. You have to have a deeper and more contextualized understanding in order to have I think, a grounded view of whether or not Chinese leaders really believe that they would like to see the United States collapse, which some people think is the case, or whether they would much rather have a world where we work together to keep the peace and do good things for this small planet. I think that that for Xi Jinping, his vision is entirely compatible with a cooperative relationship with the United States, and if you look at the external factors that he has to think about and the domestic ones, it's not difficult to imagine why he would reach that conclusion. One of the things that troubles me is the extent to which there's anti-US propaganda that is so common now in China, and it's ultimately government mandated and controlled, but it does modulate, and it adjusts according to the evolution of the relationship, and we should not forget that messaging in China often is really much more about domestic issues than it is about international issues. So it's an issue that troubles me, and I remind my Chinese interlocutors about this, that we are watching, we're hearing these messages as well. And then finally, another note about something that you hear commonly here in the United States, and that is that the Chinese and the Russians and other, but particularly China, they keep talking about the U.S. and the West being in terminal decline, that our societies are falling apart, and that it's just a matter of time before they will race ahead of us and do a lot better. I think that's a dangerous assumption. You hear people talk about this because it serves Chinese domestic political goals, but I've known a lot of senior Chinese people over the years, and I've had conversations with them where they assure me that they really don't take us for granted. They realize that the U.S. is a country of tremendous energy and adaptability, and it would be a fool's game for them to assume that we can't figure out how to get things organized better. So I don't think they take us American weakness or eventual decline as something that is certain. So those are a few opening remarks. I think we've got a good half hour, Lee, to talk about things that you want to talk about. There are so many subjects, so I will be happy to do my best to comment on anything that you'd like to talk about.